Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jeff Nigro, and I am a research associate in the arts of Greece, Rome, and Byzantium here at the Art Institute. And this program is being presented in celebration of the exhibition Myth and Marble, Ancient Roman Sculpture from the Torlonia Collection, which is on view at the Art Institute until June 29th. This program is generously sponsored and supported by the Mary Soleiman Lecture Fund, and I'm happy to say that Mary Soleiman is here in the audience this evening, and we're so grateful for her ongoing support of the museum. Before I introduce our speakers, could you please take a moment to ensure that cell phones and other electronic devices are turned off or silenced? Thank you. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce two amazing people who I have the extraordinary privilege of being able to call colleagues. Dr. Lisa Isla Çakmak, the Mary and Michael J. Harris Chair and Curator of Arts of Greece, Rome, and Byzantium at the Art Institute, who celebrates her 5th anniversary with the Art Institute this next month, and Dr. Katharine A. Raff, the Elizabeth McIlvaine Curator, Arts of Greece, Rome, and Byzantium at the Art Institute, a Roman art specialist who has been at the museum since 2011. Lisa and Katie are the co-curators of Myth and Marble, and you can read fuller bios of them both online, so rather than do that, that gives me the opportunity to thank them both personally for the tremendous opportunity of being able to assist them with this beautiful and history-making exhibition. Their expertise, enthusiasm, collegiality, and sheer hard work have all been truly inspiring, and all of it is brilliantly on display in every aspect and every detail of this beautiful exhibition. They even brought me this tie back from Rome. Okay, I'll stop fanboying now so we can proceed to what you all actually came for. This program draws upon some of the extraordinary works in the Torlonia Collection as a springboard to explore the perennially fascinating and eternally relevant world of Greek and Roman myths that also appear in the Art Institute's own permanent collections. So I now turn things over to Lisa Çakmak and Katharine Raff for Timeless Tales, Greek and Roman Mythology in the Art Institute.
We love Jeff.
He's the best.
He's literally the best. So thank you, Jeff. Like he said, our conversation today focuses on a handful of mythological stories or characters that you'll find currently on view in Myth and Marble. And since we are sadly in the final stretch of the exhibition, we wanted to tie some of these myths back to the permanent collection. Now, I just want to preview the very end of this lecture because I worry that I will get in trouble with Mel and Miguel if I forget. We have produced a little tour of the show that will show up at the end of the lecture via QR code that links to a little tour of some of the objects in the permanent collection that we are going to talk about tonight. So remember that, and then remind me, and then I'll point it out, and then you can all scan it. Sound good? Deal? Super. Let's get started with our first mythological figure, heroic Hercules, or for the Hellenophiles among us, like myself, Hercules, which I still regularly slip to, even though Myth and Marble is very solidly in the Roman world. It happens.
There's no shame.
It happens. So who is Hercules? He is the son of Jupiter, or Zeus, and the mortal woman Alcmene, and he is simply the greatest of the Greek heroes. He's known for his superhuman strength, and his two characteristic attributes are his lion skin cloak and his wooden club. And as children of the 1980s, these were two of the primary representations of Hercules that sort of stayed with us. Perhaps they had a role in forming our career ambitions, who knows? But you will see us refer to the Hercules animated motion picture several times. So if you haven't seen it recently, it's worth a rewatch. So we have two objects that we wanted to call out. First is the sarcophagus that depicts the labors of Hercules with a lid of a reclining couple. And then we have this other very different style sarcophagus. We call it a frieze style sarcophagus that also shows the labors of Hercules.
And so here we have these two side by side, and this has been, or top and bottom, and this, I think, for us in the exhibition as we've been touring through it with visitors and other colleagues and friends, has been really a remarkable opportunity to talk about these two in that we have the same visual language of the first 5 labors across the 2 sarcophagi. So from left to right, we have all the same 5 labors in basically the same formal groupings. So on the left, you have Hercules. Oh, sorry, we'll get to that in just a moment. But I want to point out, too, that these 2 sarcophagi are from completely different places. So,
right, and what's funny, you're seeing us at like week 12 of a 15-week run, and every 10 to 14 days, we observed something new during the tours. And the thing that we noticed this time was the fact that when you get to labor number 5, so at the top right and then kind of closer to the middle on the bottom. Oops, sorry, technical
issues.
difficulties. Laser pointer is hard.
It's a weird angle. Hercules is bearded by the time we get to his 5th labor. So again, you have to keep in mind, this goes on for about a decade. So of course he starts to grow a beard at some point in time.
He gets old.
And so walking through these, just a couple of them, just a few right now, we wanted to point out so you can see how just formally, how these are almost identical between the 2 sarcophagi. The one that was on the top, the one with the colonnades and sort of the columns there, is from Asia Minor or present-day Turkey, and then the one in the center is from Italy. And you have here, again, Hercules strangling the Nemean lion. This is the only way he was able to defeat it because it has this impenetrable hide. It can't be cut with a sword, or you can't shoot it with arrows. This is the only way with his just sheer strength. He's able to sort of strangle it. And then, of course, as we know, he does wear the lion skin, and he has to use its claws to sort of cut the hide off of the animal. But this is also a labor we see in our permanent collection in a much earlier Greek vase from about 700 years earlier. So again, we have the hero with his first labor, with Athena to the right with the shield. That's his sort of patron deity. At the left, sort of a nymph, and then behind that is his nephew Iolaus, who accompanies him
who's the sidekick in the television show with Kevin Sorbo.
So like the buddy.
Yeah.
And here, of course, he's just, again, so strong. He's sort of pulling his jaws apart here. So we see this very similar imagery, across the centuries. And then getting on to labor number 2, we have the Lernaean Hydra, and this is a sort of serpent, like a multi-headed, monstrous serpent that Hera, the sort of head of the female deities, kind of sends. She creates sort of specifically for him to fight this.
She torments Hercules throughout his life,
yes,
which is sort of how he ends up having to perform the labors in the first place.
And so what's interesting here, and this is, I think, a point we return to again and again with this material, is that there's no one single myth, one single story of the way this is exactly how it's told from start to finish, that there's incredible variety across time and across who's telling the stories. And so in this instance, we have the Hydra is shown in different ways. So on the left, it's sort of a single-headed, almost like a human-headed serpent. In the center.
Sorry, I keep
giving you a preview. In the center, it's sort of a 3-headed, kind of 3 snake-like headed creature. And then on the right, in this Moreau painting from the 19th century, it's 7-headed. And this is a creature that every time Hercules cuts off the head, 1 or 2 grow back. And so the only way to defeat it is to cut off the sort of immortal head at the center. And again, this is where the buddy comedy thing comes in. Iolaus has to cauterize the heads after he slices them off so they can't grow back.
So the third labor that we have depicted on the sarcophagus, on both sarcophagi, is Hercules with the Carinean hind, which is a word that I say differently every time I say it. And what's interesting about that is actually, if you look at the object the statuette on the right. So this is a relatively new acquisition for the department. And when I first saw this statuette, I immediately knew who I was looking at. I knew I was looking at an image of Hercules. And the reason I knew I was looking at an image of Hercules is because of the way his legs are and the kneeling posture of that one leg. So if you look at the two sarcophagi, in this labor, the Cairnian hind is a deer that's sacred to Artemis. He has to subdue it, but he can't kill it, and he can't really hurt it. So he wrestles it, and he kind of tames it by sticking his knee into the back of the animal and gripping its two horns. And so we can see, we are trained. We've been looking at this iconography for decades. Oh my God, decades. Wow.
Many years.
Many years. And so, we're trained to look at the fragmentary statue and see a complete whole. And this is something that we think is really special about the Torlonia exhibition is if you've been through, almost everything in the exhibition has been restored to completion. And I think this really helps us experience them in a way that is, I think, it makes them more understandable, even for us.
Right, and more closer to the sort of feeling of maybe how it could have been perceived in antiquity.
Yeah. But still, there are these formulae for certain iconographic scenes like this one. The last labor, which is only depicted on the Roman frieze sarcophagus, is Hercules fetching the apples of the Hesperides. And you can see him here. He's got all the things he needs. He has a club. He's got the apples. He's got the lion skin. He's bearded. This is his last labor. He is tired. He is tired. And so you see him in later depictions as this weary Hercules or weary Heracles that you see in the Goltzius print. He's leaning on his club to just take a minute. And again, with the bronze that's on view in our permanent collection galleries, we can imagine the club back into that bronze. We can see it because we've been looking at this iconography for so long. But it's helpful to have these other examples that really show you kind of the complete story. So next up is Alluring Aphrodite. She's an extremely popular mythological figure both in antiquity and pretty much forever. These are the two examples that we have on view in the exhibition. They are both in the Buxbaum Gallery. Or no, one is inside the Buxbaum Gallery, one is just outside the Buxbaum Gallery. And we wanted to just call out the fact that sometimes in the exhibition you'll see we use Roman names of gods, and sometimes we use Greek names. You might, if you've been through the show, might be like, what is wrong with these two ladies?
Like, make up your mind.
Make up your mind, make a decision. There was actually a thought process here, and that is we used the Greek name if the artwork was heavily reliant on an earlier Greek model or, statue. So in the case of both of these, the Crouching Aphrodite is very securely associated with an earlier Greek Crouching Aphrodite sculpture. And then the Aphrodite with Cupid and Kitos is a little bit on the cusp. She's like partly inspired by the Greek Aphrodite being surprised at her bath, but the inclusion of Cupid and this sea monster are kind of like some Roman innovations that Katie will talk about in a second. They kind of forecast some changes that the Romans make. So here are two examples in the permanent collection. One is very, very big, and one is very, very small. So this is a goddess, and this is an iconographic type that not only is incredibly popular for a long time, but occurs in many different media.
And fun fact about the large one, actually,
yeah.
you can go back for 1 second, please. This is the only over life-size statue of this Cnidian type, which is the sort of original type where she's nude coming, out of the bath, in a U.S. museum. So we really like her. She's really our number one, our sort of the object that gets all the hits in our collection.
Online.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you'll walk past her on your way out of
Yes.
here. So check her out. But moving on, beyond the fact that, one of the sort of quintessential aspects of Aphrodite or Venus's iconography is her nudity, we do, especially into the Roman world, start to see her draped. And this isn't necessarily like fully wrapped and modest. There's still a sort of hinting at of nudity in that she often has this sort of wet drapery type.
It is alluring. That's why we picked that adjective.
That it's sort of very intentional, kind of, you can tell who it is based on what she's wearing. You still see her navel through it and things like this. But even when she is a little more fully draped, she often has her garment falling off her shoulder, or it's just sort of slipping to the side, or again in the middle, sort of partially exposed, her breast partially exposed. And so this is something that it's still very much in line with the idea of nudity being part of one of her identifying attributes. And in fact, this is so much so that, again, we come back to Hercules.
You're gonna see this movie.
At least one more. It's funny though, when we were sort of, as in preparation for this, we were going through all of these, more recent media from the last, 20, 30, et cetera, years, and how we still find these things where Aphrodite is, very sort of, her garment is very fitted on the left, or it's sort of off her shoulder. And then even in Clash of the Titans, Aphrodite is the one deity who has the sort of off-the-shoulder look, unlike the other female deities shown here, who are, a bit more fully clothed. And of course, Laurence Olivier, who's just, top to bottom, down to the sleeves, so a little bit different than the normal half-clothed Zeus. But so one of the other attributes of Aphrodite, besides being a sort of spheres of influence, besides Aphrodite and Venus being again, equated, but a deity associated with love and sexuality and fertility, with that comes the association of motherhood. And so in the Roman world, in particular, she is also seen especially as a mother figure. And
Which isn't to say that she's not a mother in the Greek world.
Yes,
she is.
yes.
She is known as the mother of Eros, but in the Roman world, they really play this up.
Amp that up. So she's a mother in a lot of different ways. One is, of course, to her son Cupid, which you'll hear more about just momentarily, which is the little sort of chubby toddler there with wings. And again, I just want to point out, even in this painting, as you can see, she's practically nude with this sort of, loose drapery behind her. So this imagery, continues. But she's also the mother of Aeneas, who is the hero from the Trojan War who ultimately sort of lands in Italy and basically is the ancestor of the Roman people, which therefore makes Venus, as his mother, the ancestor of the Roman people.
And doesn't Julius Caesar also try and he's like, Venus is my mom.
Yes. So just to sort of layer on further, so Julius Caesar. He builds a temple to Venus in her role as genetrix, which means ancestor or mother. And so he says, Venus is my mom too. And then this turns into something where all of his descendants, so this includes Augustus, the first emperor, and then from Augustus, all the emperors that follow. So the entire Roman imperial family goes, hey, we're all the children of Venus too. So we're like double children of Venus because we're the direct line of her, whereas all you other Romans are just like broadly the children of Venus.
Yes.
We're extra special. But then again, coming to her child. So Cupid is, of course, also a god of love. He is the son of Venus and Mars, the god of war. So you can actually think about this interesting idea of love disarming war, and that's where we sort of get Cupid. And so he is one of the deities who's always shown in a youthful state. In fact, we were talking about this earlier. We were like, you never see an old Cupid.
No.
Like, that would be weird.
And if you did, it would be unsettling.
Yeah.
You'd be like, something's wrong.
Yeah, you'd never forget it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this tends to be, again, where we often land. And of course, this sort of chubby toddler Cupid is something coming out of even the Hellenistic world. So before we get into the Roman Empire, and again, he's this sort of winged god of love. And of course, he uses his arrows. We have the quiver down here at his mother's side to provoke uncontrolled desire, right? So this is not always love that is wanted.
Yeah.
And so he stings people in this way with his arrows. And then we wanted to acknowledge Jeff, wherever Jeff.
There he is.
Thank you, Jeff. Our wonderful colleague Jeff, who you've already heard from, who some of you may have attended a few weeks ago, an amazing program on art and music associated with the Torlonia exhibition that Jeff organized. And in this, Jeff included this wonderful painting here and the lyrics from this performance of a Purcell composition on Cupid, which is based on a poem by the 3rd century BCE Greek poet Theocritus. And our favorite part of this, it's quite long, but our favorite part is this moment where Cupid is basically being a whiny toddler, and he's like, "Mommy, I have an ouchie." He gets stung by a bee on his finger, and so his mother's, he's like, "Mommy,
it hurts."
She's like, "Okay, my baby." Yeah. But basically, what we're getting at in the poem, and this is what's so interesting, is this idea that like he is also a stinger. So we have a little bird they call a bee with yellow wings. See, mother, see how it has gored and wounded me. And then, of course, she says, "And are not you," replied his mother, "for all the world just such another peevish thing, like in bulk and like in sting." So, of course, as the god of love with his arrows, he is a stinger too, who also hurts people.
Yeah, but can't, he can't take his own.
Can't take a dose of his own medicine.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So a curious thing about Cupid, and we'll see this again later on, is he ages a little bit in his representations. He doesn't age, like we said, like an adult Cupid would be weird and unsettling. But we also see versions of Cupid as sort of a young man, and that's the version that you see in the exhibition in the statue of Cupid and Psyche. Cupid is represented with his wife, Psyche. He falls in love with her. They have a little bit of an unconventional marriage. She's not allowed to know who he is or lay eyes upon him, as one does when one is married to a god. But so you have Cupid kind of in these different periods, and they both occur in both Greek art and Roman art. Like there isn't like an order, like, oh, he's only young in the 6th century BCE, and then he switches to being youthful in the Hellenistic period. Like you see all of them pretty consistently. This is a really lovely sculpture that when we saw in the storerooms, we immediately loved, despite, nearly 80 years worth of grime and dust and dead bugs on it. And as we've been thinking about this statue, something that's so interesting is the famous version, the most famous version of the story of Cupid and Psyche comes to us from Ovid's Metamorphosis. And Ovid is a Latin poet. So we have this story and we have images of this story in Greek art where we would call it Eros and Psyche, which is a Greek word. Ovid, of course, translates Eros into Cupid, but he does something curious in that he keeps Psyche or Psyche as Psyche. He does not translate her name into Latin, which we should probably look this up in a dictionary.
We're like pretty sure it's anima, and this is like dusting off the Latin from 20 years ago. But
you would think we had Googled
maybe
this by now,
knows.
but we haven't. But he does it, the story doesn't come down to us in later Renaissance paintings and later cameos and gems and examples as Cupid and anima. Mm-hmm. It stays Cupid and Psyche. And what is really remarkable about that is that in this sculpture, it's almost like we have this this marriage of the Greek and the Roman, and that they are so intimately entwined. And in fact, we often call antiquity, from the Mediterranean, Greco-Roman antiquity. We blend those terms together. And I love how this sculpture for us has come to represent that concept.
Yeah. They're literally intertwined.
They're literally intertwined. So of course, like I said, this is an incredibly popular motif that continues on, and here's a version that we have in the permanent collection. And again, you can see this is that adolescent Cupid. One fun fact One thing that does change in the representations of Cupid in the Greek world is he tends to go from having very like short, stubby little wings early on, and then in sort of like the Hellenistic period, he gets these sort of longer wings. You're welcome for that. Completely useless bit of knowledge. Now, not to complicate things, but to complicate things, this is Cupid, capital C. There is one Cupid. He is the son of... Thank you.
He is a god.
I love that you guys are paying attention. But then there are Cupids, plural with a lowercase c. And these are creatures?
They're like mythological figures that are sort of almost like a foil for children. They're sort of underfoot. They're often in divine context, but not always. And then to complicate things, sometimes they don't have wings.
Yeah.
So you're like, is it a kid or is it a little Cupid with a lowercase c?
Yeah. So here in the exhibition, we have an example of Cupids working. This is very common in ancient Roman art, more so than ancient Greek art, where you have Cupids doing things. And in fact, Katie and I really want to do this show that's just Cupids doing things. Cupids making wine. Cupids going to the gym. Cupids
Wrestling,
flying.
playing with a hoop. Pretty much everything you can imagine,
Right.
Cupids, if they could do it in antiquity, Cupids did it.
Yeah. Which you can sort of see here in this later work on paper. And of course, these Cupids, lowercase c, become the putti and the cherubs of early modern art. So there is this really long, I don't know if you've picked up on this, there's a really long arc between antiquity and modernity when it comes to Greco-Roman mythology. Sort of the big idea of today's program. So we go from Cupid, who, is this cute, charming, pudgy little baby or toddler who matures into a very handsome adolescent young man. And then we have poor misunderstood Medusa. Now this is a section that was basically crowdsourced. Yeah. It's thanks to all of you. We, as you can imagine, have been giving tons and tons of tours. And this is probably the top three questions that we have gotten. It's about these three guys. And you're like, but what does this have to do with Medusa? Stick with me. We're going to get there. So here we have three portraits of the first three emperors of the 2nd century, Trajan, Hadrian, and Antoninus Pius. They are all three of them are wearing armor. They're wearing a cuirass or breastplate. And so you can see I've circled, they each have a motif on the middle of their breastplates. And people have been asking us, what are they? Right. So let's take a closer look.
And why are they different?
Right. So one of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. And I think, which one is it? Raise your hand if you think it's number 2. Excellent. You guys are doing so good. So what's happening here? Because these are all representations of Medusa. Mm-hmm. But like Katie was saying, there isn't like one single version of any mythological figure. So we have 2 different versions of Medusa here. And what you see as sort of like the like source, kind of some of the source imagery is Hadrian is the one who has the slightly different Medusa. And here we have a coin, an ancient Greek coin that shows the face of Medusa. And in early Greek mythology, and I will quote here from an extremely useful book, like real book that you open with pages, the Oxford Classical Dictionary, which describes Medusa as that she had a round, ugly face, snakes instead of hair, a belt of the teeth of a boar, sometimes a beard, huge wings, and eyes that could transform people into stone. So I think that's what we have here. And what's interesting about this is, remember, Hadrian. Hadrian is the emperor, I think,
He basically he has a nickname that's Greculus, which means Greekling. It's actually kind of a pejorative term, but maybe, I don't know, maybe Hadrian didn't realize that. But he loved Greece. He spent, of his 21-year reign, he was there 3 times, and he spent a good part of it dedicated to learning about arts and culture. So he loved all things that were Greek.
And so it seems kind of fitting that his armor would go to the early Greek version of Medusa. The other 2 portraits, I've only included the one of Antoninus Pius, but both Trajan and Antoninus Pius, those busts are early modern restorations. So that means they were made in the 17th, 18th, or 19th centuries. And it seems that the source for that is the Rondinini Medusa head, which is a late Hellenistic or early Roman version, which you see all the way on the right. And we'll talk a little bit more about this. But what's interesting about why she looks different is that Medusa seems to have had an excellent PR agency working on her behalf. Because in the late classical and early Hellenistic periods and on into the Roman period, she undergoes a bit of a transformation. And again, we look to our friend Ovid and the Metamorphosis, who describes her as a beautiful maiden who's punished twice by the gods. First, when she's ravaged by Neptune, and then when she's punished by Minerva or Athena, who transforms her into this beautiful maiden with snaky hair. So she has these 2 sort of very diverging identities. And so here in the Delville picture, we were kind of looking at this one and we were like, which one is this? Like, do we think that this is sort of the Greeky monster or the later maiden? We weren't really sure, but the eyes is what really got us. We thought that the focus, the glowing green of the eyes kind of pitched it for us into the monstrous, scary Medusa.
We're sort of waiting for her to open her mouth and there to be fangs.
Yes.
So.
And she has a belt made of teeth.
As one does.
As one does.
And so again, we see how this plays out in different ways in more, pop culture and contemporary media. On the left, of course, we have Uma Thurman with, this would be the Ovidian, beautiful version where despite this hair of snakes, she's still completely gorgeous.
Right. You put like a sack and weird stuff on Uma Thurman and she's still going to be gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's annoying.
And then, of course, with Lego in the series of minifigures, of which I love how they often do a lot of these different ancient themed ones. But of course, you have the Medusa one. I personally have this at home. I like to think it actually serves an apotropaic or like warding off evil function in my house. I don't know.
Could put it on a necklace.
Yeah, you could, exactly. But again, we have that this is the more monstrous version with the teeth, with those eyes, just like in the Delville painting. But what's interesting here, going back to what Lisa had just mentioned with the from the Oxford Classical Dictionary, they talk a lot about also that she has wings. And this is something that seems to get lost in these sort of later interpretations, that what we see in the Roman sort of more prettified versions is that she has these wings on her head, and in the Greek version too. But that is a key part of the ancient iconography that sort of seems to just kind of fall to the wayside because it's more of the focus on the snaky hair and the different elements.
Turning people into stone.
Yeah, kind of a big deal. Yeah. Who cares if you can fly if you can do that?
Yeah.
But so in the Torlonia exhibition, again, we have 2 versions that are based on this earlier type on the right. So on the left is an ancient head of Medusa. On the right, because in the Torlonia collection in the 19th century, they wanted a pair in this instance, probably to flank like a doorway or a fireplace.
They wanted a symmetrical presentation.
Right. And so they had that version that's in the middle that you see there, that is completely modern, and it's based on the version on the left.
Right.
But
so
then,
this one is modern, this one is ancient.
And then that one is based on the one on the right. So just follow the arrows there. But again, you have here that there's really only a hint at the snakes under her chin. It's not quite the same element that we often tend to think of today of just sort of writhing mop of snakes. And then, of course, these sort of clipped short wings alluding to her ability to fly. And this is something, again, that of course, as we've already seen with the Delville, but that later artists are certainly picking up on and looking to. And so, for example, with Canova, we have this terracotta head which is really of a type that's a model for what he was able to do when creating in preparation for the full-length statue of Perseus with the head of Medusa after he slays her and uses her head and then ultimately gives it back to Athena, which then it winds up on her breastplate.
Right. So that brings us all the way back to the three emperors who wear on their armor the face of the Gorgon Medusa, because it is thought to be this protective, warding off of evil. And it's a motif that carries forward.
Mm-hmm. And one other thing, even we were just talking about this earlier today, Lisa had brought up a really good point also about, again, we have to remember that even looking at artists like Canova is based in, he's in Italy. He has the opportunity in Rome and to see works like that Rondinini head of Medusa, to look to the actual ancient models for this. This isn't just sort of in a vacuum that he's creating something that looks like this. Like there's the opportunity at this point in the 19th century to see these earlier ancient models that were very prevalent, even in museums already at that time. And Dionysus, one of everyone's favorite deities. He is one that his imagery is just far and wide, continues across time. And of course, Dionysus, as one of the Greek gods, also again has a Roman counterpart and an Italic counterpart, or sort of a deity from the kind of mainland in Italy. So they're all Dionysus, Bacchus, and Liber Pater, which in Latin means free father, also known just sometimes as Liber, are all sort of more or less, equated as deities of wine and revelry, but also theater. And of course, you can imagine that with wine, you sometimes become someone different and act differently, as one does in the theater. And also a deity of agricultural fertility. So even, how the wine is grown and things like that. And so we're fortunate to be able to show, Dionysus at different. He's mostly a young man. I will say we were talking about this as well. You do sometimes find older Dionysus, but that's in sort of earlier Greek art.
Yeah, but once we get to sort of Hellenistic and Roman art, which is where obviously we're very firmly sitting in the Torlonia Collection, he's another one of these, like Cupid, he's one of the few that's shown little as a baby, and then, kind of as a youthful young man.
And so we have him here in different ways, both in the Torlonia exhibition as an infant at the center, and then at the right as he's in the top right corner there, again in that sort of youthful nude pose, often with his sort of characteristic wreath of ivy and berries and vine leaves, again alluding to his agricultural.
I have to chime in here. We love this little Bacchus, this baby Bacchus, because he is drinking and driving with not a care in the world.
Not of age.
He's not of age.
But he is a deity.
I mean, how many laws is he breaking right now? He is not of age. He is drinking and driving. Yeah. He is indecent exposure. Yeah, all the things. All the things.
But beyond, of course, the god himself, he also has a retinue of other sort of followers who like to engage in the same revelry and merriment. And one particular category of these are satyrs. Specifically Silenoi. So this is like the Cupids again, where we have lowercase, uppercase. Yep. So Silenoi, or like Silenuses, if you will, are the sort of, there's many of them. They don't really necessarily have names. They're just sort of these I'm going to say part human, part animal. And this is not half and half. Sometimes it starts in the Greek world part horse, and then they sort of turn into part goat. And so they are these older followers of Dionysus or Bacchus. And fun fact here, again, as I'm just alluding to about the part as opposed to half, we often get questions of people looking at the one in the center, which is one of these older Silenoi, sort of, you can tell by his age based on his body type and sort of, his shape, also his beard. And but people will say, well, but don't satyrs and Silenoi, aren't they half, they have goat legs?
Yeah.
We're like, not exactly. Sometimes it's just the ears. Sometimes they have a little tail. They can be mostly human form.
It's like the Princess Bride, mostly dead. Yeah. Not completely dead. So it's mostly human, not completely.
Right. But then sometimes you do, again, let's reference Hercules one more time. Third time's a charm. We've got Danny DeVito as a Silenus here. And you can just imagine that voice coming out of that. And that is one where it is that, lower half is a goat. But then sometimes, of course, we have younger versions And I think Lisa has described this pairing very eloquently. So on the right, we've got the muscular, youthful version, and then on the left, we have the sort of older, kind of flabbier version. And
yeah, so I was recently at my college reunion. So it's like, there's like the trim senior frat boy who's rolling a keg to a party, and then there's the alum who's 30 years out, perhaps, who's trying to relive his college days. So it's sort of like the young frat boy and the old frat boy together.
Yes. Except their kegs are wineskins.
Except their kegs are wineskins.
Yeah, but same idea.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we go even to the other extreme where we have sometimes child satyrs. And this is actually somewhat, not rare, but more unusual compared to the adult satyrs. And so this little guy, I will say, if he's a fan of, many people are, sorry, he's not a fan, many people are fans of him. He's typically in our permanent galleries on long-term loan. He's doing a residency in Gallery 211 if you want to see him in context with 17th century artworks, because it has restorations from the 17th century, much like many of the Torlonia works.
Yeah.
And so again, just kind of an initial look, there's often that moment of like, oh my God, what is that? Yeah. And it's actually a child satyr with a Silenus mask. So it's basically like a child with an old man mask. So this is the old man version of a little child satyr. But how do we know he's a satyr? Bing! So he's actually got the tiniest little tail. And this is something really interesting. This was actually only figured out about 15 years ago because this is a work, even though it's been known since the 17th century, people weren't noticing the tail.
Yeah.
And so they thought he was actually just a wingless Cupid. Again, Cupids can not have wings, just to complicate things.
Lowercase Cupid.
Lowercase Cupid, yes. So we have this different array of his followers here. But then, of course, everyone likes to have a good convivial drink. And I want to thank our colleague, Liz McGoey.
We've got Liz. Thanks, Liz.
Yay for Liz. Liz, one of our curators here in the Department of Arts of the Americas. And as we were having conversations with colleagues about, what are the works in your collection that showcase Greek and Roman mythology? And Liz had pointed out this one that we were actually not familiar with, and we were so thrilled to learn about. We find this Dionysiac imagery in this suite of presentation silver that was created in the 19th century. And Liz had told us this really interesting story about this, that after the Civil War, the U.S. had sued Great Britain under international law for disputes that had arose out of the Civil War, specifically the most significant of which was the claim that Britain had violated its neutrality by constructing warships for the Confederate Army. Okay, now stick with me. We're going to get to Dionysus. Because it was like, okay, Confederate Army, how do we get to Dionysus? And so ultimately, that there were 3 dignitaries from neutral countries who had arbitrated, and Britain was found guilty and had to pay the U.S. reparations. But so in thanks for the arbitrators' efforts, the U.S. government had commissioned these sets of presentation silver for them, which are based on this revival style popular in the mid-19th century, which include imagery of myths and symbols from ancient Greece. And so what we have in the punch bowl at the center, we have these amazing handles that depict busts of Bacchus. And so I think Lisa made a really interesting observation as we were talking through this, is that this is an offering, a thanks in thanks. And there's an object in the Torlonia Collection that is also an offering in thanks that is just rich with Bacchic or Dionysiac imagery. And in fact, it may be an offering to Dionysus or Bacchus or Liber Pater. And it is this amazing relief depicting the port of Rome, which was known as Portus, which had a temple to Bacchus or Liber Pater. And it's kind of hard to see here, but there's imagery all over of Bacchus. He's at the top right. He's in very small relief on both of the ships. There's also an inscription on the sail, which might suggest that this is a dedicatory offering to the deity. So it's just really interesting thinking about there's this sort of association of revelry and conviviality and the gift giving that also comes with wine. I mean, how many of us bring a bottle of wine when we go over to someone's house? Right?
So we want to wrap up today this eternal Odyssey. You might be like, wrap it up, ladies. But we are nearing the end of our journey tonight. And we sort of close, not that the exhibition necessarily has a very strict beginning, middle, or end, but sort of at one end, we have this statue of Odysseus beneath a ram. And what we always enjoy pointing out to people is that when this was carved in the 1st century CE, Homer's Odyssey was almost, not quite 1,000 years old. I mean, this is a poem that is so much older than the moment that this statue was created. And then I was fortunate enough to take a class in college with Daniel Mendelsohn, and he just this past April, so, the month before the month of May. Guys,
been a long week.
It's been a long week, okay? I'm sorry. But he just published his own translation of the Odyssey. And so it's been interesting to think about the staying power of this poem that is so old. But now bringing it back to the collection, we have on view in Gallery 238 this panel painting from the front of a marriage chest with a continuous narrative from the Odyssey. And what's so fascinating about this is that the figures that are not naked are wearing 15th century garb. And Odysseus is even wearing, because Odysseus is the king of Ithaca, he's wearing a crown that's based on the crown of later Byzantine emperors. So they're referencing this poem that's so old, but they're also updating it, to be of their time, which is kind of interesting. But if you look closely at the Cassone panel, you'll see that it even illustrates that same particular vignette of Odysseus escaping from Polyphemus's cave. Odysseus and the sailors, his crew, are shipwrecked on Polyphemus's island. He locks them in his cave, and he starts to eat them. And so they devise a plan, right? This is Odysseus, the man of twists and turns. He's sly, he's clever. So they blind Polyphemus, and in order for him to make sure that the Odysseus and his crewmates aren't escaping, when he lets the sheep out, he pets them. And so Odysseus and his crew members clutch on to the bottom of the sheep as Polyphemus is petting them, and that's how he escapes. But a lot of the works that we've been referencing are really very much in the early modern European tradition. We do have the 19th century American silver. There are others, but we wanted to call out this Romero Bearden collage, The Return of Odysseus, Homage to Pinturicchio and Benin, which is in the collection. I first learned about this just 5 years ago when I came to the Art Institute, because I think someone asked me a question about it, and I didn't know the answer, which is pretty common for me. So I had to phone a friend. I phoned one of my college professors who was an expert on Homer, and he knew exactly this Bearden collage. And what's fascinating about this is so first, let me back up. What are we looking at? We are looking at a different scene from Homer. This is where the suitors discover Penelope's ruse. Penelope has told these suitors that she will choose one to marry when she finishes weaving her wedding cloak. And every night, she undoes what she had woven that day. And so this is the suitors, breaking into her private chambers and calling her out for trying to avoid marrying them. So Bearden's collage is from 1977. He is basing it on a 16th century Renaissance painting by Pinturicchio, but he includes elements in his collage that are inspired by the artwork of the African nation Benin, hence the title, Homage to Pinturicchio and Benin. And so he sort of uses this artwork to sort of transform this poem into a more global story, and to emphasize the common struggles and joys of all humans. And Bearden said of this work, and I quote, "It's universal. So if a child in Benin or Louisiana sees my paintings of Odysseus, he can understand the myth better." And this retelling it's still happening. So I didn't know this. This movie came and went, apparently. I thought it was coming out soon, but apparently Juliette Binoche and Ray Fiennes were in a version in 2024, and there's also one coming out next year with Matt Damon as Odysseus and Anne Hathaway as Penelope, so I'm kind of curious. I don't know that I'll go to the theater to see that one. Or
Field trip?
Field trip. Yeah, departmental field trip. Maybe that's what we'll do. But so we come to the end of the lecture, and on the slide, we move from a sculpture from the 1st century to a marriage chest from the 15th century to the 20th century with Bearden's collage. And all three of these artworks find their ultimate inspiration from a single Greek poem. And we've been working on this lecture for a little while, and I was recently reading Mary Beard's book, Confronting the Classics. And I was like, oh, I know how we can close this lecture, because I was just reading something about, in her book about, like, what does it mean, what do we mean by the classics, and what does it mean to study the classics? So, Katie, could you do the honors?
Yes. So, of course, in the immortal words of Mary Beard, to put this as crisply as I can, the study of classics is the study of what happens in the gap between antiquity and ourselves. It is not only the dialogue that we have with the culture of the classical world, it is also the dialogue that we have with those who have gone before us, who were themselves in dialogue with the classical world.
So today, we have been in dialogue with an anonymous Roman sculptor, an Italian Renaissance painter, and a celebrated African-American artist, as well as this 2,000-year-old ancient Greek poem. So what we've done tonight is we've all studied the classics. So thank you for coming today. We have that slide that will have the QR code if you want to go find the artworks that reference mythology that are on view, and go see the show if you haven't seen it, and if you have, go see it again.
You got 3 more weeks.
Thank you.